Hello, folks, and welcome to Friday's edition of Ability Maine Storytime. We are a um, nonprofit based in Maine that does this. We've been doing this most of through the COVID crisis, and it actually is easier for me as a writer to do research and then talk about it for an hour. And then maybe at some point, if I have to put resources up, I can put them up as um, um, many um, stories or links, but not necessarily full stories. Today I'll probably put a couple links up for some of the stuff we're talking about. Some of the stuff I'm talking about is um, possibly going to be um, causing triggers to people. This week has been extremely difficult for um, anyone in America who's been doing, who is probably over the age of 35. Um, so to recap, um, this week started with, or last week ended with the Taliban seizing control of Afghanistan and causing a large number of American and people who helped America be trapped in Afghanistan. There were some absolutely horrific um, photographs coming out of Afghanistan, and again, this is a trigger warning for anyone that has PTSD or issues with 9/11. Um, if you're over a certain age, remember that 20 years ago, 9/11 happened about 20 years ago and 2 days, and or 2 weeks. It will be 2 weeks next Sunday, or 2 weeks Sunday. So we're going to be barraged with a um, flood of 9/11 stories that are going to just replay the horror, and I mean absolute horror of that day. And there's nothing that can be said about how bad that day was. I am going to minimize it. I'm not going to continue on with it because I don't want to try and trigger anybody. But I am also going to give some really good advice that just if you do have to deal with this stuff, how to deal with, you know, 9/11 and just how not to deal with the media, how to turn off the media, how to set your smartphones up so that you don't get phone calls you don't need, how to avoid media that could be triggering or frustrating. I am going to talk about a couple of interesting, really incredible um, abstracts and stories about, or studies about media consumption in 9/11. That actually, it, um, it turns out that because so many people watched the news and television after 9/11, that media consumption became a way, I guess, to um, as it became a way to get to, if not get PTSD, to get um, a condition that would be like that, or get symptoms that would be exactly like that. Um, in a study afterwards, um, where it was a randomized nationalized study where people were asked what their um, worst uh, thing they ever went through was. 22% of people, and honestly, these are people who had no direct connection to or indirect connection to 9/11, said that 9/11 was the worst thing they ever went through, which in a way is kind of ridiculous. Well, it made researchers who looked at PTSD really think about PTSD, because before that, it was never even thought about that media itself could be a reason that causes PTSD. And honestly, I just thought about doing something on this because I'm just thinking today that, it's going to be really disgusting as it goes through um, the media coverage of 9/11 because the what can trigger, um, you know, something for somebody with PTSD, and I certainly have several different anxiety issues. I definitely have PTSD probably amongst them. Um, but my anxiety diagnosis is so bizarre. I couldn't even come up with how many the correct diagnoses um, for all of them because it just changes so much. But um, also, as in addition to last week's um, story on uh, our, we did a story last week quickly on um, the student loans being forgiven, and if you are ITT um, alumni, 155,000 um, student loans are going to be forgiven as of yesterday. That's different than anything I talked about last week. Just type in ITT student loans. You should be able to get more information about that. Um, but going back to what we were talking about, um, um, this is the I'm going to read something from the International Society of Trauma Stress Studies and located in Chicago. They're really an incredible blog. And this is a story that I found out about, that I read, that was just kind of mind-blowing. Worst life events and media exposure to terrorism. It's by Rebecca R. Thompson, PhD, Allison Holman, PhD, family nurse practitioner, and Rebecca Cohen Silver, PhD. Unfortunately, all people are likely to have had something bad happen to them over the course of their lifetimes. This includes both individually experienced events, such as the loss of a loved one, or experience of physical assault, as well as collective traumas, such as events that are shared across the entire community, such as a natural disaster or terrorist attack. The September 11th, 2001, 9/11 terrorist attacks were one central collective trauma that was shared across the United States. Millions of people watched it on their television sets and horror as planes crashed into both towers of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, events which marked a shift in many individuals' views of the world as a safe and benevolent place to live. Exposure to 9/11 via the media, especially to graphic imagery of the event, was associated with negative mental outcomes amongst viewers, including people living very far away from the attacks. A team of researchers at the University of California, Irvine, was interesting how people considering and cataloging their various life events, including both direct individually experienced events and indirect collectively experienced ones, to determine which is their worst life event. In our study, we assessed how 9/11 factored into people's assessment of their worst life events, given that people across the United States only experienced it via news media. We administered the researchers administered 2 surveys to a nationally representative panel of U.S. residents who reported no direct exposure to 9/11 attacks, and at least 75% participation rate in each wave. The first um, survey was fielded 9 to 22 days after the attacks. The second was fielded approximately 1 year later. In the second survey, participants were asked to complete an inventory of their negative life experiences and indicate which events they considered to be the worst of their lives. In our nationally representative sample, the most commonly cited worst life events were those characterized by loss, e.g. death of a spouse or child was like 42%, violent traumas were cited by 11.4% of the sample, of physical assault, combat exposure. Most surprisingly, 22% of our national representative sample indicated 9/11 was their worst life event, even though none of our participants had any direct exposure or knew anyone that died on that day. Individuals who selected 9/11 as their worst life event were on average younger, had experienced fewer overall life events, and reported more distress in the weeks after 9/11. Using logistic regression, we sought to test the predictors of selecting 9/11 as one's worst life events. Analysis from the researchers revealed that individuals who reported fewer violence and loss events in the past were less likely to select 9/11 as a worst life event. However, having consumed a daily average of 4 or more hours of 9/11 television weeks prior to the event following the attacks was associated with an increased likelihood of selecting 9/11 as a person's worst life event. Which goes to show that basically 40 years ago, and I mean, I guess to put this in perspective, we live in such a disparate media gallery. We don't have, people have, I guess from a media perspective, people don't watch the same things at the same time anymore. We all catch something on replay, or we get it on Hulu the day after, or we download it, or we watch a podcast or something. 20 years ago, everybody was watching the news, worried about the next possible 9/11, and so watching news for 4 hours was like normal. Everybody was doing it, and 4 hours more was probably what you would do just to keep up with everything. We were going to war, but yes, I mean it's very clear in this article from the International Atomic Stress Society that this really had major impacts in how our collective mental health was changed. Before this, media consumption was never even considered as a reason for PTSD like or PTSD like issues, but honestly, when you have this kind of thing where 22% of the people who looked at this said they were the 9/11 was their worst event. Um, these results held when accounting for other potential explanatory variables, including demographics, cross mental health diagnoses, anniversary-related television exposures, neuroticism, the experience of a 9/11 near-miss event, and television watching habits. These findings have important implications for clinical practice for news media. In the most recent version of DSM-5 on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which contains the mental criteria for a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, exposure to trauma via the media is explicitly excluded from consideration as a potentially traumatic stressor. And that's as of 2013. These results directly counter that and demonstrate that this exclusion might be unnecessary and that the impact of exposure to collective trauma through television, other media outlets, online news, and social media should be acknowledged by mental health professionals. Further consideration by news media regarding how traumatic content is broadcast and marketed to viewers so as to not create undue stress is also warranted. But today when we broadcasted, we did also have a trigger warning post before we went online, and we had a trigger warning live video before we went online. And we did also broadcast, and this would be about 9/11 and PTSD before we went online. So, again, this is from the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. Excellent blog. That's rstss.org. They do great work. And it's 10 to 5. And I do appreciate you for staying with us today. I know we have at least one person viewing. And hi out there, whoever it is. So, again, I know this is a little bit repetitive, but please bear with me. I'm trying to go over some stuff. And again, I guess I should probably, I can give you some things of what I would do, or what I usually do when it comes to 9/11. If I don't want to be involved, number one, turn off your TV. Turn off your TV if you can for the next week or 2 weeks. You really don't need it. You may need an iPad or your smartphone, but if you have NPR or the BBC, if you're in Maine, you can listen to BBC online. If you really need to watch TV, you can listen to PBS NewsHour. That's really non-violent. It's usually really pretty relaxed too. They also broadcast BBC World Service. That's a lot more violent than I want to deal with right now. Especially given the week that has ISIS-K and Afghanistan doing horrible stuff. So literally, I don't watch TV. I do watch some video stream stuff, but I don't watch news really live. Unless it's a broadcast, and I can catch it on Twitter or my iPad. What's here? Pluto TV has some Sky News UK, which is much more. The UK base seems a lot less sensationalistic, at least the Sky News one is, the international Sky News one that Pluto TV and YouTube News have, which is also free. Um, so if you need to watch something, you can watch that. But don't watch TV because TV stresses you out. This study confirms that. Um, you know, if it's 9/11's gonna not stress you out, put your phone on do not disturb mode. That means that you can set that up so that only people who you really need to talk to can talk to you and that or message you. And you can control that certainly by who you allow to talk to things. And like if you have the ability to get away from the television or get away from media, we live in Maine, you can go to State Park, a bird sanctuary. In my town, there's a bird sanctuary um, right within our limits of our city. You could walk from it. It'd be doable from well, actually the buses aren't open that days, but there'd be other things that people could do. Um, but genuinely, this might be a year to like avoid it. It's the 20th year anniversary of all this stuff happening, and the whole push to get out of Afghanistan, and you've got news media. I'm sure CNN is doing this 24 hours a day coverage, and it really is horrible, horrible news that's coming out of Afghanistan. Please don't think I'm at all trying to downplay that. It's not. Knowing, being a journalist who's had friends who are journalists, and I actually have had relatives that have been to Afghanistan, and I have friends who work in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I have friends who are in New York City on 9/11. You know, it's scary to think of what would happen if the last 20 years had changed in a way or things had gone differently. And by all means, it's definitely not easy for me to deal with. I mean, I remember that day I was trying to be a journalist, and I was, because of that, the attack, the police I worked with for let me go because they couldn't afford to keep me. And they couldn't afford to pay me what I wanted to get paid on a full-time basis. So I literally, and it's like, and that just goes back to like basic, if you look at what happens in the economics after 9/11, we went through an economic downturn, and the lowest people on the run, the people who are black, indigenous, people of color, lower educated people with disabilities, regardless of education, regardless of previous job history, still can have difficulties getting jobs if you don't know how. Like for me, or for most people, mentors that are disabled that have gone through job issues seem to be a problem. And 9/11 was really difficult for me because everybody afterwards wanted to go to join the service, and if you're 4F or if you have a disability, you just can't do that. It would have solved a lot of problems for me if I could have, because hey, I could have been a freedom fighter and worked to, and I would have been, I would have had a job and would have been great. But reality is that I'm a pacifist, and probably the last thing in the world I would do is join the military. Although my cousin is in the military bands, so I can't like, I'm not one to judge. I mean, just obviously being born with a disability was nothing that was ever in my uh, possibility. Um, and I think I'm going to read a couple more stories about this collective trauma of 9/11 and certainly the collective trauma of today. Um, and what we've gone through this week in terms of the pullout from Afghanistan and the terrorism that's gone on has been really difficult. And they said, and according to people who watched a lot of 9/11 news, not only had a lot of mental health issues after the terrorist attacks, but a lot of physical ailments such as cardiovascular issues, anxiety, and fear were a big issues. I will say that definitely my anxiety level went up after 9/11, and I was diagnosed with some pretty severe anxiety disorders before that. Um, um, and I think, and what this article, it's a VOA article, I'm going to link to it, I'll link to all the articles I talked about today, is also in the last 20 years, Americans have become so um, immune to violent imagery. Seeing things like 9/11 was catastrophic because it was the first time we saw someone die in real time. Now with smartphones, with Twitter, with Instagram, with YouTube, we can see that stuff without any sort of news media footage that can cut off before it's commercial, or not show something live, or not show murdering happening, or and everyone knows about the ISIS propaganda videos. Those things are now collective consciousness. They were never collective consciousness beforehand. We never thought about school shootings until 1999. That was only 2 years before 9/11. We've changed completely. We've had hundreds of school shootings in the last 20 years. That's not an understatement. We're talking several hundred school shootings in the last 20 years. In just America. I don't know what I don't know if there's and that's, I guess, and, we have, since, in the past 20 years, the types of attacks that we've been exposed to have been much more media savvy, and media covers them more, and media saturates the airways more. They're all over, from the Orlando Pride bombings to attacks, sorry, was it bombing with attacks, to the, Capitol insurrection, to shootings at Walmart, the 2017 Las Vegas concerts. These things all become very basic things that we become almost immune to, and for people with significant disabilities, people with severe anxiety, they become severely frustrating. Personal anecdote, I had my first seizure, my first grand mal seizure, uh, within the week of the Pride shooting in Orlando. I was up late trying to find a friend of mine's mutual friend or a friend of mine's friend who ended up being safe. And then I ended up getting into a stupid fight politically on Facebook. I was at a concert. The concert had lights in it. The band had a history of epilepsy and issues with epilepsy. In their native country, they were opening for a band called Cure, and well, I almost died of a grand mal seizure. I was probably very close to dying. But luckily, I was in Boston, and they have a bunch of MRI machines, which Maine does not. So I was in the right place, right time, and got treated well, got diagnosed well. It was quite lucky to be so well treated. Uh, but and a lot of these people, medical, psychological experts are saying that people should limit your media consumption. That it's not good for your mental health to be exposed to all this stuff. Although it's also not good for your mental health to be not informed. And I mean, again, we're also living in a world where, 20 years ago I couldn't broadcast to the world on Facebook, and now I can, and I do frequently, and that kind of blows my mind because, I mean, I'm just a guy on a cell phone with an iPad who does a lot of research and, you know, talks for an hour every so often, and hopefully gets a like or a comment or something, and that's good. But I mean, think about the proliferation of all the media we've had in the last 20 years. I mean, and how violence and how, like, YouTube is just made a industry out of violent montages and car crashes and car chases and the worst this and the most horrible that and the most ridiculous other things, and watch it and watch it and watch it. And obviously that's going to affect people's mental health. But getting out and seeing nature has a great way. If you're able to go out into nature, do so. Exercising helps. It reduces anxiety. I definitely don't doing that. Getting enough sleep, which again I don't get nearly enough sleep, but with me that's definitely my. I have issues with my medication and my epilepsy meds, so that's one of my real big issues. And and I'm trying to think. There's anything else I should be talking about. Again, if in terms of media, one more thing is if you have kids who were growing up, children who grew up around 9/11 are probably far more likely to have anxiety. So generation the millennials probably have a lot more anxiety because of watching all that media was just that bad. And while it's really difficult to put any sort of Uh, and it's kind of funny because they actually said that um, 5% of children that had watched a lot of TV, like I described, and about 1.2% of adults uh, from a uh, 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 um, from the or a study linked to that study I just talked about said that they had um, symptoms consistent with PTSD just from looking at the media. So obviously, if 5% of children can have higher rate of symptomology, then media must be hitting children far more than adults. And it does that. So the anxiety and the fear that it produces is real. Um, and I don't have enough information to really go into that right now. I might be able to do that one day. Um, but it's close to 5:15. I'm gonna call it a story time because really it's close to like 85 degrees up here in Maine. I'm sweating my shirt off, and I really need to get done because I'm just literally exhausted, and this um, topic is really hard to discuss without having some major issues with being triggered personally by it, and I hope I gave enough warnings so people weren't horribly triggered by it. But I do appreciate everyone for listening today. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back probably Monday, if not Monday, Tuesday. We'll be definitely putting something online. We are online where we do post. Um, Next week is also um, what next Friday becomes the weekend before Labor Day as well. MDA is doing a telethon. Next weekend they do a telethon type thing with Kevin that they started doing last year. So we're gonna continue with that. Maybe we might do something with that. I have a bunch of ideas that we just haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, I hope you have a great weekend and see you next week. And thanks for listening to our story time.